الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Child Abuse and Violence by Professor Mahmoud Hani Sulaiman. Indeed, at the beginning, I would like to say that this subject is very painful to me to introduce to you, but it is a must in order to try to prevent this child abuse and violence. Forms of child abuse and violence. Extreme forms of violence against children include sexual exploitation, trafficking, female genital mutilation, and cutting. The impact of armed conflict have provoked international outcry and achieved a consensus of condemnation. They are not acceptable to public at large, but many children are routinely exposed. This is the real world to physical, sexual, and psychological violence in their homes, schools, care, justice institutions, places they work, and their communities. Everywhere they are exposed to this. Where violence against children remains legal, state-authorized, socially approved, and thus grossly underreported. Unfortunately, many adults believe that children are subhuman, whose reflexes must be trained by violence. Many adults believe that children are subhuman, whose reflexes must be trained by violence. Types of abuse and violence: physical and mental. Physical, corporal punishment with canes, belts, etc. Forced into uncomfortable position like chair, a popular method in schools. Female genital mutilation, prevalent in Africa. Mental, verbal abuse, locking in a room, أوضة الفيران, prohibiting leisure activities, being bullied by another child in school, seeing parents fight is a type of abuse, of child abuse. Child labor may itself be considered a form of abuse. To be continued. Sexual abuse. Most incidents of sexual abuse against children do not make headlines. The 11-year-old girl in joint family could not possibly understand significance of 22-year-old cousin or raping her until it hurts, and when it comes out of bag, family will usually tell the girl to shut up because of certain family prestige. Young boys are often sexually abused in their workplaces rather than homes, usually through anal sex, thus may fall victim to HIV. Acceptance of violence among children. Most frightening part is that children may themselves accept some degree of physical, sexual, and psychological violence as inevitable part of childhood. They are afraid to complain because they are taught to obey adults even if order is to put their pants down. Effects of child abuse. Exposure to violence in early childhood, whether as victims or witness, can lead to growth retardation, mental impairment, sociopathic behavior, substance abuse, early sexual activity, criminal tendency, anxiety and depressive disorders, impaired work performance. So violence may lead to growth retardation, mental impairment, sociopathic behavior, substance abuse, early sexual activity, criminal tendency, anxiety and depressive disorders, impaired work performance. Impact of violence in children is devastating and threatening their survival and development. Violence on children is devastating and threatening their survival and development. Fatal or non-fatal injury, fatal or non-fatal injury, health problem, cognitive impairment, psychological, emotional consequences, mental health disease, risky behaviors, developmental and behavioral illness. So the impact of violence on children, injury, health problems, cognitive impairment, psychological and emotional consequences, mental health disease, risky behaviors, developmental and behavioral illness. Prevention of abuse and its consequences. UN recognized need to protect the human rights of children. Rights of child in 1959 put the following principles. It must establish child protection. Child protection. These principles include child protection, laws against child abuse, child labor, violence, prostitution, and trafficking must be prevented. Services for children abused, child-friendly recovery system, child-friendly recovery system. These among the main steps. Another subject, gender differences. Given a chance, boys and girls grow up on average to be equal citizens. Boys and girls must given the chance to be equal citizens, but being self-destructive species, humans, it is no wonder that boys and girls are each burdened with their own set of problems since childhood, which are entirely preventable and unnecessary. First, boys expected to live to male stereotype of being strong and aggressive all the time. Parents, family, society telling the boy, you are man. It is a big bad world out there. Go fight it out. Go fight the world. Boys try to follow this model, so fine society accepts degree of violence and expects it. He finds fighting in school, gangs, bullying weaker or younger children, spitting, smoking in public, swearing at each other, insulting passers-by, teasing or grouping girls, very manly. There will be always misfit who will not fall for this cult. He soon finds himself victim or an outcast depending on his position. In adult life, those manly traits often transform into drug abuse, hypersexuality, criminal behavior. In adult life, these manly traits often transform into drug abuse, hypersexuality, and criminal behavior. Second, the girls. Life is a struggle for survival. Life is a struggle for survival. They are taught that they are unwanted in family, may die due to parental neglect in infancy and malnutrition. Many parents don't send girls to school. Many parents don't send girls to school. Certain social sex imposed upon them by dolls and kitchen sets in their childhood and by sexual abuse in adolescence. It is into their consciousness. They are objects to be subjugated, manipulated, and disposed of at will of men. If she escapes this, there is still high possibility she would be stolen or sold from parents and trafficked into prostitution or married in childhood with dominating husband, get pregnant in teens and die in childhood. One of UN Millennium Developmental Goals is to eliminate gender disparity in primary and secondary education and at all levels. So, eliminate gender by disparity in primary and secondary education and at all levels. Here is another problem among children which is considered abuse, which is child labor. About 20% of GNP of some developing countries coming from child labor. Working children are deprived of education, good nutrition, and they have long work hours and dangerous toxic work with little wage without rights. So deprived of education, good nutrition, have long work hours and dangerous toxic work with little wage rights. Some people accept exploitation of children and perceive as a necessity to alleviate poverty. Most of child workers are migrant children, cannot go home, so sleep at workplace and are trapped because family depends on their income. Rural poor families perceive their children as income generating resource. Parents sacrifice children's education to growing needs of their younger siblings. Girls trapped in a far worse situation known as maid servant. Apart from suffering all disadvantages of child labor, they are also sexually exploited. Another form of child abuse is child trafficking. Children may be transferred out of their homeland by being lured into a hypothetical job, forcibly abducted, sold by parents. These effectively orphaned children then used for commercial sexual exploitation, prostitution, or child pornography, forced labor, or services. Slavery, servitude, removal of organs, illicit international adoption, early marriage, recruitment as child soldiers for use in begging or as athletes, fast becoming a major export commodity of poor countries. Another form of child abuse is street children. Majority of street children have lost a parent or both or have left home because of abuse or have been kidnapped. These children live harsh life of others and are victim to sexual abuse, HIV, malnutrition, parasitic infections, drug addiction. They are easy targets for drug dealers for production and distribution of illicit drugs. They are often used as scapegoats by police and viewed as criminals or criminals in waiting. Child abuse problem in Egypt. Many children in Egypt suffer various forms of violence, exploitation, human trafficking, and inadequate family care. There is a widespread of violence as a socially acceptable disciplinary practice. Girls are particularly vulnerable to various forms of abuse as female genital mutilation and child marriage. In 2014, Demographic Health Survey showed that 90% of children aged 1 to 14 years were exposed to violent disciplinary practices like psychological aggression and or physical punishment. Girls are particularly vulnerable to various forms of abuse as female genital mutilation, FGM, and child marriage. Prevalence of FGM in 15 to 17 years girls steadily decreased in past decade. However, regional disparities exist. For example, among girls 0 to 17 years, those expected to undergo FGM equal 90% in some Upper Egypt governors. Regarding child marriage, the same DHS showed that child marriage affects 6.4% of girls aged 15 to 17 years. Solutions for child abuse in Egypt. First, the situation analysis for this. Support services and alternative forms of discipline. Children who are abused tend to keep quiet rather than reporting it. Less than half of all children surveyed knew what to do when abused, and less than 10% knew of any services that could help them. However, few parents, children, or school staff are aware of Egypt's child helpline or know its easy to remember telephone number 16,000. From the situation analysis, main recommendations emerged. Government of Egypt must strengthen its efforts to prevent and respond to violence. Policy of zero tolerance for violence against children, physical, emotional, or sexual against them. Rules for key actors on this issue. Main recommendations continued. Parents and families should have support to raise children without violence. Government, civil society, and religious leaders must share in these specific interventions like parent education. Long-term national media campaign must be put to overturn attitudes and social norms that encourage violence against children. Prevention of child abuse. First, the child labor laws must be strengthened, and the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act and other laws must be put in work. وفي النهاية أقول الحمد لله رب العالمين و thank you for your good listening.